Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about something I get asked very regularly, and this is traveling to India. Now, as you probably know, India is one of my favourite countries to travel in. I've been there about 4 or 5 times and covered around 16 states now. So I've done a lot of central India. I've been up to the northeast, which I love, Nagaland, Meghalaya, and also up to the northwest as well, up to the border with Pakistan, Amritsar area. I haven't actually visited that much of the south, and it's definitely on my list, but I'm going to be giving you some tips and ideas for traveling to India and what you need to know before you go there yourself. Okay, so the initial practicalities that you need to get out of the way first. You are more than likely to need a visa before you go to India, and you shouldn't overlook this because I'm not going to lie, it does often take quite a bit of time. Now, the process is easier than it used to be. You can now get an e-visa, but you do have to do this before you arrive, and it actually can take possibly a couple of hours to fill out the form because it's not the most straightforward. I would say leave at least a week before you travel to India in order to get your visa. When you look online, it says probably about 72 hours is the turnaround time in general to get your e-visa back. It can be longer than this, and equally it could just be the next day, but you need to leave that amount of time just so you're not caught short before you fly. I've put a link down below for the only place that you need to get your visa from. I know that there are lots of websites online saying that they'll do your Indian visa for you, but they are going to charge a premium. So the website that is listed down below here is where you need to click to get your official Indian visa. Now, if you have been to India before, it does actually ask you for your previous visa number, which can be a little bit of a problem if you have got rid of your old passport. So I would say that if you're planning to go back to India again, make a note of your visa number, keep it in an email or a phone, something like that, and then when you go back again, you know where your visa number is. Now, if you're applying for a tourist visa or a business visa, you can do both of these online. The fee varies depending on what type of visa you want. It's probably around $75 at the moment for a tourist visa and about $100 for a business visa. You also need to think about whether you want to do a single or multiple entry into India. If you're planning on leaving and then coming back again, obviously get a multiple entry one. It does ask for your port of arrival and where you're going to fly out from. Don't stress too much if you haven't quite finalised this. It's more of a formality, and they're not going to stop you coming in if you've put that you're entering in through Delhi and you actually fly in through Mumbai. Okay, so now you've arrived in India, I would recommend that even the most seasoned of travellers book your first night of accommodation for when you arrive. It can be a little bit of a shock arriving in India. It's quite hot in general, it's busy, it's quite noisy, and as much as I love it, it can be a little bit overwhelming if you've never been there before. So I'd say book the first night, it'll give you somewhere to rest and recuperate before you go out exploring the next day. India is obviously a cash economy. Most of the hotels and resorts will take credit card as well, but in general you are going to have to carry cash around with you. I use an ATM most of the time, just my normal credit or debit card to get out cash, but there is a limit to how much you can withdraw at once, and at the moment it's around about 10,000 rupees, which I think is about $150 at the current exchange rate. It's always helpful to have some big notes as well as smaller notes when you're travelling around, because if you're just buying a cup of chai, something like that, you don't want to be paying with a really big note. So make sure you've got bits of small change as well when you're out on the streets. My next tip is to keep your itinerary flexible. The reason for this is it's joked that IST doesn't stand for Indian Standard Time, it stands for Indian Stretchable Time. And I'd say this is probably true. I think sometimes when you're travelling around, you need to have a bit more flexibility because things like trains and buses aren't necessarily going to run on a rigid timetable. Now, I've actually been on Indian trains quite a lot and I love travelling on them, but I'm not going to lie, I have waited 6-7 hours for a train to come along sometimes. So you need to have a bit of flexibility in your itinerary. Don't be leaving just an hour or two gap if you're really trying to get somewhere. Leave a bit more time, and it'll also give you more time to actually enjoy your journey. Generally, you need to keep a kind of relaxed, laid-back attitude to your travels in India, and this will actually make you enjoy your trip that much more as well. Having said all of this, I would definitely say that you need to keep open-minded about this flexible time in India, because there are feats that happen in Mumbai and Delhi that would never be able to happen in New York City, for example. So if you look at Mumbai, there are 58 different newspapers in 29 different languages, and these get delivered all over the city, and I just think that's absolutely incredible. And even more impressive than this is the famous tiffin lunchboxes. And these are lunchboxes collected from home and then delivered to workplaces around the city and then back again. And they do this every single day, and apparently there's only one mistake in every 6 million. And you can't imagine that being able to work in any other country in the world. My next tip is to pay attention to the local cultures. So when you're traveling in India, like when you travel around a lot of Asia, you might get a little bit of attention as a Westerner, but in general it's all going to be friendly, and I'd say just like in any other country in the world, a smile goes a really long way. Some of my best experiences in India have been when I've just gone with the flow, met local people and sat and had chai with them, listened to their stories, eaten a meal, and you learn a lot about the local cultures this way as well. Now, India is a really diverse country. It should actually be about 3 time zones with the size of it, and somebody that goes to the northeast might have a very different experience to somebody in the south. And having said that, each state has its own cultures and its own way of life. They've got different foods, different religions, different customs, different dances, and you do really need to travel from state to state to be able to appreciate this. Observing the customs in one state doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the way that they're observed in a different state, but don't be afraid to ask. I've been in lots of different situations where I wasn't quite sure what I was meant to do, and people have been very friendly when I've asked them what the custom is. So for example, I went into a temple in India and I was given a small bowl of cucumber, and I wasn't sure whether I was meant to eat this or give it as an offering. So luckily I asked a local person and they explained to me that this was actually an offering for inside the temple. So I didn't embarrass myself by munching on the cucumber and offending anybody. My next tip is to forget everything that you think you know about Indian food. So as a Brit, I eat a lot of Indian food back home, and we're used to seeing bhunas, jalfrezis, madras. They're all the famous names. But you're unlikely to find lists like these in many places around India. India is an absolute haven for vegetarians. I am a meat eater, but when I'm in India, I do love to eat vegetarian food. The way that most restaurants and shops list it in India itself is veg and non-veg. So this would probably mean that the vegetarian option would be the standard and the meat option would just be the alternative. Certainly in the more rural areas like Jammu and Kashmir, up in the Himalayas, you're going to get less meat options, and you're more likely to be given roti and dal and roti, which is what I had about 3 times a day while I was travelling through Ladakh. Now, water will be served in most restaurants and cafes that you go in, probably in a jug, and I know that some tourists will be wary of this because they don't want to drink water that's not from a bottle, but generally I'd say it's fine. It's going to have been filtered. The locals will drink this, and I've drunk it on all of my trips and haven't had too much trouble at all. One thing that's quite interesting is I found that Indians in general tend to share water bottles, which is something that would be a bit more unusual in Europe. I do this too when I'm travelling with the crew, and all we do is pour the water from the bottle rather than touching it to our mouths. So obviously it's still just as hygienic and more convenient if you're in rural areas when you actually can share it together. Obviously, Indians famously eat with their hands, and I love doing this too. Whenever I'm in India, I always eat with my hands when it's appropriate. And because of this, of course, hygiene is really important. So people are very conscious of washing their hands thoroughly before they eat a meal. So most restaurants have sinks or bowls inside the dining area, so you can go and wash your hands. Or equally, sometimes people come round with a bowl and a jug of water, and they'll pour it for you and you can just wash your hands ready for your food. My next tip is once again to take your time. If this is your first trip to India or your second or third, there's going to be so much that you want to do. But because of the heat of the day, you can actually get incredibly tired probably dehydrated as well. So I'd recommend that you just take the pace a little bit more slowly and perhaps even get up quite early, like I did in Varanasi. I was rising at maybe 4 in the morning. I could do a couple of hours out on the boats exploring, and then when there was the midday sun, I could go and have a rest and then come back out again to explore when it's a little bit cooler. So a lot of people have been asking me about getting sick in India. And a phrase that I love to use is local drugs for local bugs. So although you might want to take some medication from home if there's something specific that you usually take, in general, I'd say if you do get ill, then go into a local legitimate pharmacy when you're away and tell them what's wrong and get them to recommend something, because this has usually been quite beneficial for me. Equally, the kind of old wives' tales, natural remedies have been really helpful as well, because when I was travelling up in the northeast of India, I started to get quite car sick from all the winding roads, and it was recommended that I had some ginger. So I went and bought some candied ginger sweets. Quite an intense flavour, not exactly my favourite, but it really helped, and it was a great recommendation, just something natural that I could easily pick up. In terms of clothes, my top tip would be that a scarf will be your new best friend. If you need to be a bit more conservative, you can throw a scarf on. If it's hot, you can cover your head. If it's cold, you can use it to wrap up. Equally, if you need to go somewhere and want to look a little bit more dressed up, a colourful scarf will add a bit of colour to your outfit, and you don't need to carry loads around in your backpack. Generally, I'd say India is a little bit more conservative than back home in the UK, but having said that, certainly in the bigger cities like Mumbai, there are loads of people that wear Western clothing. I think sometimes people have images in their head that everybody's wearing a sari. This isn't the case. Lots of people are wearing jeans and vest tops. But also, wearing a sari is actually so much fun, and whenever I go out, I do love wearing like brightly coloured outfits with the jewellery, although I usually have to get a local to help me wrap it because the sari is quite hard to put on. Now, these are just some of my top tips for first time travel to India. I've got plenty more, but I think that's enough to be getting on with for now. Above all, when you're travelling in India, enjoy yourself and just go with the flow, and I'm sure you'll love it as much as I do. If you've enjoyed the video today, make sure to hit subscribe below, and I'll see you guys soon.